distant skies, firefight calls, the stakes are high. On the flame, heroes and spies, control fire, where strategy lies. Hear the tales, fierce and deep, victors roar, defeated weep. We blaze a way, we don't hold back, control fire, ready to attack.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of Controlled Fire, your monthly musings on Mantic's Firefight. I'm joined by Mike and Luke. G'day, gents.
Hey, Sam.
Evening.
Controlled Fire aims to bring you an episode each month, jam-packed with all things Firefight in under an hour. This month, we're going to be looking at Command Protocols, the first major supplement for Firefight that wholesale replaced the rules of the game, making it almost an edition 2.1. It's been out for a little bit of time now. And I think we're kind of just coming to grips with it.
I think we've all played a few games with it now and starting getting a little bit more comfortable with the changes that have happened since the original version.
A few games and a couple of dozen lists under our belts.
Yeah, so there's been some pretty major changes, and we'll unpack those later in the episode. Before we get into the command protocols, let's meet the Controlled Fire team. We might just start off having a bit of a chat about our gaming background. Mike, can I throw to you first?
Sure. I guess like everybody, most people in the hobby started off with Games Workshop and Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I was in, about 3rd edition, playing with some friends in the garage in Sydney with the time. And then I actually moved out into the country, into a little town called Wagga Wagga in Australia here, and played 40k for a while with some of the guys down there. Came back to Sydney eventually, started playing 40k competitively for a while. Went back to Fantasy Battle again, playing Ogres until from 7th edition to about 8th. And then basically by the time 8th finished, by the time 8th started, then my daughter was actually born and I moved up here to Brisbane. So I actually stopped gaming for about 10 years. My son and my daughter were growing up, and eventually wandered into a club called Greater Springfield Gamers, and met Sam over here and showed me Dreadball and got into it and playing into a league, and been playing pretty much Mantic Games since. Dreadball, Dead Zone, Kings of War, of course, and then finally when Firefight came out, I've been playing that since then. So it's pretty much where I'm up to now.
Wonderful. What about you, Luke? I think people mostly know you as a Kings of War player, but you also play Firefight.
That's right. Well, so I also lived in Wagga Wagga, but that's not where my story begins. We have to roll forward a few more years to 1997, where a family friend introduced me to Warhammer when we were visiting them. So dived into that, loved it. Turns out that when we moved up to Queensland, my next door neighbour also played. So we'd have afternoons painting models and evenings playing Warhammer and Necromunda. From there, moved on to 40k and played that for a little while, but then had a bit of a hiatus as I went into other games like Magic the Gathering and D&D. Dipped in and out of miniature wargaming a few times over the next few years, and finally made my triumphant return to Fantasy Battles with 8th edition and the End Times, which shattered that pretty quickly. So I took another short break before I found the local Kings of War community. So you guys and Springfield Gamers and the rest. So now I play Kings of War, Firefight, and Dead Zone.
Well, for myself, I also started in Warhammer back in 5th edition, and then I jumped into 40k at the start of 3rd. I worked for GW as a red shirt for about 7 years, and so played most things that they were bringing out at that time. So Blood Bowl, Necromunda, Mordheim, Warmaster, Battlefleet Gothic, and so on. But once my GW days are behind me, I started playing some of the Hawk War games now, TT Combat. Drop Zone Commander and Drop Fleet Commander, which I really still like. I first started getting into Mantic Games with the first Kings of War Kickstarter, just as it was, I guess, first starting to launch there, and then from there getting into everything else like Dreadball, Dead Zone, Warpath, Vanguard, and so on, as well as a lot of the board games, so Hellboy, League of Infamy, Umbrella Academy, of course. But Firefight is what I'm playing the most of at the moment. Excellent. Well, Mike, do you want to tell us a little about what it is that you particularly enjoy about gaming? What brings you to the table?
these days, in the past, I would have said I was a reasonably competitive player, but these days I'm just happy to get people together around a table to roll some dice and have a few laughs. I organise a few things like Dead Zone days, come and play days, not just at the club, no, but also at some local gaming stores, as well as which hopefully I'm hoping to build a Firefight community out of that eventually as they get into Dead Zone and then move into Firefight with the same models. So that's basically how I moved into that section. So I'm trying to encourage other people to move along on it. So yeah, it's just introducing the game, getting people to play, have a few laughs and have a chat and things like that. And that's what I enjoy about the hobby really these days.
Wonderful. How about you, Luke?
What I kind of really like about the war games in particular is the strategizing. So I like, building lists and thinking about different ways to play the game. I play Kings of War quite competitively. I kind of picked up Firefight because it looked fun, and I thought this can be my casual, non-competitive game, but it's a bit too hard sometimes to scrub away the filth. So I kind of have a track record, I think, in Firefight that probably belies that intent a little bit. But it is actually my what I don't intend to compete in, and sort of just having fun and play around with it.
Excellent. For myself, I think I really enjoy the campaigns that can surround games. So putting on things like a Vanguard campaign or a Dead Zone campaign, multiple Dreadball leagues, and so on. I really enjoy having the narrative, the protracted stories as they go, the characters that emerge. I think that's the thing that really brings me into a lot of the gaming. That's what I go for. All right, let's get down to business with command protocols. So a lot of changes have come through with command protocols. Like I said, it really did feel like edition 2.1 when it dropped. We're not going to go through comprehensively all the changes that have happened with command protocols, but I think it's certainly worth picking through. How has it changed the game? What have been the major changes? Luke, can I throw to you first?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the change where the player that finished the last round gets to choose who goes first or second, and that in the first activation you can't use the extra activation from your command points. So this one's kind of, it's trying to stop those feel bads, I think, where you can sort of double activate and shoot something off, or do your mule rush with the mule before they get to activate and charge something out and take something off the board. And we've spoken about this before, command protocols, and I think we all agree that it needed to change. That was a bit too powerful. For me, I feel like it probably should have been that neither person's first activation gets to double activate. And the reason for that is that what they've tried to do is they've tried to balance it so there's no clear advantage really between being the person that goes first and goes second. There's advantages and disadvantages to both, but elite armies in particular really do play around strategizing around activations and making sure that they finish first to get that powerful first activation. And it's kind of a bit of a double hit to those elite armies because they've had other changes in the book that kind of hurt them a bit as well. Mike, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I have found that when it comes to the end of a turn, trying to struggle which way I'm going to go, just with a single action, or do I want to have the double action and see whether or not I'm going to survive whatever they want to do. So it's good because it gives an extra choice at the end of each turn now in deciding whether or not rather than automatically getting the first turn, you might decide that you want to try and double activate and cross your fingers and hope that their single activation isn't going to blow you off the table. So I think that I actually do think it's a good move. I'm not sure about taking two singles. I think that takes it back to the point where it depends upon whether or not you want to go first, because then you're going to double activate. You've got potential to double activate after that.
Absolutely. I do like that now. I mean, I think the elite armies still have that reason to want to finish their activations in the prior turn first, because that gives them the choice going into the next round. And I do like that the choice they're basically faced with is, do I want to go first or do I want to go big? I can either do a rapid strike with a single unit and hope that it's meaningful, or I can give that to them and then I know that I can chain in my first activation of the round. I think that's a good choice for them to be.
Yeah, I agree as well. because having the choice is always better than not being the one with the choice, right? So there still is a benefit. I just feel that allowing both players to take one action before any doubles occur still gives agency to the player that goes second. Even if they can't double activate, they still have agency to potentially foil a plot or to try to preempt something that may come their way. So I definitely think this needed to change, and it's a great change. And I think the change to allowing you to choose whether you go first or not was necessary regardless of this change. I think that was a good change as well. I just think that I would have liked to have seen, a bit more power to the player that finishes first, because otherwise there's not a whole lot of chance, not a whole lot of reason in my mind to be the one that finishes first and to go first.
I don't know. Being able to start the next turn and being able to choose whether you're going first or that you're going to be the first to double activate, I think is great.
But I don't think it outbalances the ability to run out someone's activations and act with impunity. I think that's where, it used to be that low drop armies, I think, could work and high drop armies could work. Now I lean much more heavily to high drops. I would always rather run out someone's activations and act with impunity later than to... The only time I'll ever battle for first turn is if we're close anyway. I wouldn't spend half my command points double activating
and racing
to ensure
to get there.
I'm not racing. I might do it if at the end if I go, I've got 4, you've got 5, I'm going to double activate to make sure I get there first and get the choice. That's a different story. But that means we're playing on an even playing field in terms of drops and activations anyway. So I'm not gaining any benefit from running out your activations because we are on an even footing. So I just think it's a bit of a blow to the elite armies.
Fair.
Yeah. I guess as we've changed the systems now, but from before this rule came in, I was predominantly a Forge Father player, so I was actually quite used to not getting the first turn. I generally didn't have the command point, so I was outrolled and the other person got the first turn, and I was generally then knew after that I was going to be finishing activation first, so I could double activate the next time, right, if I wanted to. So for me, it didn't really matter that much. I was sort of got used to that fact that it was going to happen. So I didn't really feel like, obviously playing an elite army, that I was disadvantaged that much. But now I kind of have that choice on what I want to do now, whether I want to do it. So I have to admit, generally I still take the first turn, but yeah, it's good to have that choice. But generally, I'm playing against other people who are playing with armies with many more drops than I do, still playing Forge Fathers. So it's generally how it happens to me anyway. So that situation hasn't changed much for me.
All right. Mike, you want to lead off with the next major change?
I think this next one is the introduction of 2 new orders. One of them I do use quite often, which is the steady aim order, which means that your unit can't move now, but it can actually reduce one of the negatives that might be to your shooting. So whether it's cover or stealth or whatever it happens to be, you can remove one of those modifiers to make it easier for the shooting. And I think it makes things very interesting as the choice, because a lot of the missions you want to actually get to a particular point to be able to score points. So it really can give you a bit of a conundrum on, do I want to stand and shoot and reduce the negatives of what I'm attempting to hit, or do I want to try and charge forward and jump on an objective or threaten an objective to start scoring points? And that becomes quite interesting as far as that is concerned, which then brings into the second order, which is Overwatch, which means that you can move forward. And if you don't happen to be in range, you can then nominate to the fact that if somebody is going to charge your unit, you actually then get to make a charge reaction to that from them coming towards you. So if you can rush and stand on an objective and then you can go into Overwatch, you have to make a standard move and then go into Overwatch, then that will benefit you. But I guess also Overwatch also comes from the defensible is the rule as well. So you get that automatically for defensible, which certain armies have a fair bit of, and then you also have it in the building rule, which is in there too.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you're spot on with steady aim in that if the game weren't so weighted towards you need to advance up early because there's a lot of progressive scoring objectives, and we'll probably chat on objectives and missions in a future episode, but because the game is so weighted towards you need to get up the table, it means that having an order like steady aim isn't too unbalancing, which is effectively, although it's cancelling a negative, we can think of it as I'm not going to move and I'll get +1 to hit or cancel a negative to hit. If the game could have a tendency towards gun lines and that kind of play being dangerous, then I think having that steady aim order would be bonkers. But because everyone does need to keep moving, it's not too unbalanced.
How does steady aim work with slow reload, though?
If you have slow reload, then you get no additional benefit from steady aim.
Right. See, that's probably mildly annoying if you're taking things at slow reload, I suppose.
Well, yeah. It basically means that you have to hold still and get no benefit for it. But that's, I get, even before the steady aim rule, that was kind of the way it was anyway.
In Overwatch, I think I'm glad that it's not as prevalent as it could have been. Certainly the first few lists I picked up when this came out had a lot of Overwatch, and I thought, oh no. And the reason I thought that was there's been a lot of nerfs to melee in this release. So obviously the Mulepedo thing has been heavily nerfed. But even that aside, there's been some major nerfs to melee, and this is another nerf to melee, really indirectly. So it is a way to counter melee armies. And I don't know, just it's a lot of stacking on sort of cumulative nerfs to melee that kind of makes it a lot less of a viable build type for me now. Every time I've tried to write or play a list that has a fair bit of melee, I just think it feels reasonably ineffective. And certainly every time I've played against someone that's playing a melee heavy army, they just die. They just come at me and they die, and there's nothing they can do about it. So I don't know.
That's just you.
Yeah, the other ones just stand still and die. These ones come at me to die. But I think Overwatch is cool. It gives a way to counterplay. I would have liked to have seen it in an ecosystem where there weren't so many nerfs to melee in other avenues. But yeah, so I have come around. I am a bit of a fan. I kind of wish there was some ways to get it a bit more, targeted, like the enforcers have. They have a command that can give Overwatch. But yeah, no, it's fine overall.
I actually thought I would be using Overwatch more than I am. A lot of the times it's, I happen to have an action free because I'm stood on this objective. I don't want to use my advance action. I've already taken my shoot. What else can I do? I'll go on Overwatch. Why not? Because I don't want to be moving right now. And so it's, unless you have defensible and are getting that Overwatch for free, and unless I've got a particular play, like say I'm running ciphers and I want to shoot, and then I go Overwatch so you can charge me and I can shoot you again. I guess it's never my primary play, is what I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think Overwatch mostly is a benefit for defensible units, whether that's in building or whether you have the keyword or an order. It's why I think Peacekeeper Defenders are probably one of the most important units in that list now. Unfortunately, they're specialists, so they need to be unlocked, and that's an entirely different story for later. But yeah, no, these are good.
All right, we've also seen some pretty major changes to factions, and although without calling them as such, I think I'd like to focus on effectively signature keywords for some of the factions. Well, we've seen major changes, I think, particularly to the Forge Fathers and how they've gained heavy armor pretty well across the board on a lot of their units. Enforcers they've got their defensive tech now with having 2 wounds apiece, and Plague have their defensive tech with so much of the army having regen. Marauders arguably had all this before because they had resilience so firmly across the board, but there's been some relatively major changes to a lot of the factions. The other big change for all the factions as well is effectively the doubling of the number of available vehicles. Of course, this coincided with the option to play games in annihilation mode, and so we saw a greater diversity in vehicles. But I think that's probably been another big change to be coming out of command protocols. Do you have any thoughts on the way they've changed the feel of the new factions?
I love the way all the factions feel, because I do feel that they all have their own character. Yes, the Forge Fathers are now incredibly tough and can survive for a lot of firepower. But on the other side, but as I said, they don't have, compared to some other factions, they don't have the amount of firepower to put back out again, and they're also generally slower moving. That 1 inch doesn't seem like much, but their transports don't move as fast as other people's transports. So they're not as fast moving. So yes, they can generally slowly move up the board and get the fire, but some other sneaky, I think there's all those sneaky little bits as well. So as I said, with Forge Fathers, they've got heavy armor across the board, but they're slightly slower. The Enforcers have now got 2 wounds, and they generally have 2 shots, so they put a lot of fire out and they have more wounds in the unit, but they're probably the one faction that works with defensible, thus Overwatch, more than anything else. So generally each faction sort of has a couple of extra additions. One of them might not be as prevalent or easy to spot as another one until you start to dig into the list. And those are the 2 factions I know the best, because it's the 2 that I play the most. So I'll leave on to someone else, I guess. Luke, you want to talk about some of the factions you play?
Yeah, well, in particular, I think I want to call out the changes for Marauders and Plague, because before this, they were basically the same army. Unless you were playing some really skew Marauder list, basically with, say Ripper, Rainmakers, etc. If you wanted to do a melee build, you've got the same vehicle access, basically. One's Stunt Bot and one's Strider when it comes to those walkers, but they've got basically the same vehicles. A lot of their units really are kind of similar in how they operate. So they were just the same army. You could build the same army in either of them, and it didn't matter which one you chose, it was the same army. Now they actually have their own unique feel to them, and their own unique play styles and way to play. So that's been excellent. I think the regeneration is quite annoying to play around, but it gives them this really nice, sort of unique feel. But yeah, I think probably the introduction as well of Maison kind of opened up, a bit more of the idea of sort of mini sub factions within the faction a bit more. So you've got things like the different Maison segments, which is similar, I guess, to Asterians with the Macedon and the other stuff that they've got. And even when it comes to something like the tag rifles for Pathfinders, etc., sort of having these sort of sub synergistic mini factions within the factions is really good as well.
I do hear what you're saying with Marauders and Plague being similar in original Firefight. I think they do play differently. Obviously, Plague they're a bit hoardier than Marauders are, and hoard in the troops and big boys supporting. But I think probably the way they were played was very similar, in that you could bundle everyone into a bunch of mules and run them straight at the enemy, and then everyone jumps out and hits them hard, and that's how we play the game.
We call those the glory days.
Because that's not the case anymore. Did you want to chat a little on the major changes to transport vehicles? And I know you mentioned before about some melee nerfs.
Yeah, so the new assault rules say that when you don't have line of sight to the target you're charging, and that could be because you are charging out of a transport or from behind a wall, that you are hindered as per normal, but you also get an additional -1 to your attack rolls. Additionally, when it comes to transports, you cannot disembark from a transport if that transport took a sprint action in its turn. So now you're only able to sort of move 12 and shoot with the mule, and then bundle your troops out and charge forward. So your maximum charge range there, unless you're particularly fast like dogs or have an order available, is going to be that 24 inches. So that means no more turn 1 charges. Mike, are you happy to be not facing that anymore, or is that a terrible change?
I don't know. I do think it's a good change in essence, because I think getting across the table almost like for turn 1 charges is not a good experience for anybody really, including especially for new players. It's a bit everyone wants to think they have a chance, and when you've got something in your face straight away, it's not a great feeling. So I think overall for the whole game, it's definitely a best change that could have been made there to keep that under control. I'm not sure if I 100% agree with you on the fact that I think melee is a lot less than before. I do agree it's lower, but I don't think it's completely wasteland, because I think tactically it can be used very well in keeping some other units under control. So,
but particularly because if you win that combat, you're marking that unit as activated, and you can force them to be spending their charge reaction in order to spend their activation that way. I will also just jump on you can absolutely charge more than 24 inches.
There's plenty of ways to do it.
My plague definitely do. In that just baseline move the mule up 12, and then out come the leapers or the ghouls 15, and there you go. And that's before orders. But for your marauders, I appreciate they're shorter in range now.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can always put skyscrapers in a mule, right? There's nothing stopping that. They can charge 15, but you can do the cheeky thing. You can do the cheeky thing where you deploy the mule sideways on the line and then just sort of turn it as you're moving.
They do have some things. I think it might be in the FAQ, or it could be in the rules now, which is actually about the furthest point of a vehicle, and you have to nominate a point, and then you can then come. So
That's good. Yeah.
So you can't do vehicle shenanigans, but we'll look that one up. Excellent. Well, we've just been talking about charging out of transports. Mike, did you want to chat a little bit about buildings?
I guess while we're still on transports, just for a little bit, one of my favourite things that I used to do in the old version of Firefight was actually have my leaders getting taxied around inside my transports.
Yes.
And then, because in the old rules used to be that the auras used to actually permeate then from the actual chassis of the vehicle, so you actually got not only range, you could have the extra mobility to be able to do so as well. So that's what I used to do all the time. I used to have my Steel Warrior, her skull sitting in it and driving around, and then I would eventually jump out at some point and attempt to score on the quarter or on an objective. But these days you can't, if the leader can only actually impact any other unit that happens to be inside that vehicle. And that actually is the same rule that goes on the buildings as well. So now if you have a leader inside a building, it only impacts any other unit that's inside the building. Or as I said, if you've got a leader inside your vehicle, it only affects at that point anything that's inside the vehicle. Otherwise, it needs to get out of the building, or it needs to get out of the transport, which is a huge change.
Absolutely. I mean, there were a lot of vehicles which saw use for just being effectively chariots for generals in order to ride around on. I mean, Hornets were actually potentially useful there, and now they aren't again. But there's a bunch of those. I guess the conception behind it is that was effectively a command vehicle because it was the commander in a vehicle. But now all the factions have their own command vehicles, which are dedicated command vehicle with their own order.
Yeah.
Well, Luke, I'm assuming you're able to find some sort of filthy exploit for the way buildings used to be.
Well, it's still possible in a way. It used to be filthy. So yeah, I mean, you could do things. Particularly auras emanating from buildings. When you look at the forward observer from the Enforcers, he was able to scout into a building, providing, in the old rules, cover, defensible, and then his stealthy aura from his command.
For a -3 total?
For a -3 total, and to anyone within, was it 6 or 12 inches of the building? I mean, he is anti-grav, so you can still do it to the roof of a building. You just don't get the extra distance of the aura. So yeah, I mean, I think it probably needed to change. I'm not sure roof sections are handled quite how I might like them now in that vein. Because they're not they have sort of half the rules of buildings, but not the other half.
I get what you mean, because it's effectively you're needing to go up through the building to get to the roof, and then it acts like a hill, I guess, effectively. It's a flat area of terrain, sometimes with a barricade around it, but it's just an area of the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to go through the building if you're Enforcers, but...
And I've also seen a mutant rat fiend climb up to knock my jet bikes off a roof as well. All right, so I guess another major change that's happened is the sheer growth in faction orders. It used to be that factions only had 3 each.
Yep.
And now that's doubled. But the other big change that now you can only use each one once, and that's been absolutely game-changing. I mean, particularly for my Asterians, they're now a lot more interesting to play. Because it used to be that the game you play was, I just need to control my activation order so that as you shoot at me, I can then activate the unit and bring the shields back up again. Fine. Or I'm activating later, you're not going to shoot at me, I'm now going to no charges. And because you can just continually keep hitting energize, you could just always have your shields up if you keep good activation control, and now you can't. And so now there's a good role for shield drones. It's made Asterians a lot more interesting to play for mine.
And a bit more fun to play against. Pros and cons to this. I enjoy not having to shoot down so many shields consistently for an entire game. On the flip side, I think we need a moment's silence for the loss of Firestorm.
It still exists. It's just changed.
It's great. The new one's great. I like what they did with it because I still get to Firestorm, but it's not the it's not the destructive force that it once was. First activation with a unit of Enforcer Heavy Support, Firestorm, was just disgusting and brutal, and probably shouldn't have been part of the game, and now it's not. So that's good.
Well, I think nearly every faction had one order that everyone used to spam. And I think that it changed to that now is good because people have to work around and pick different units, basically, then have a plan potentially on what they're going to use that order with that particular unit for. So I think it's good because now you have more diversity of potentially of units, and as you said, it becomes more a strategic choice on what you're going to use that one order that you're able to do this turn on which particular unit and to work it out. So I think it brings a little bit more strategy involved in the game with that change.
Yeah, I agree, but I do actually find one negative, I think, is that I spend a lot more time when I'm activating units actually rereading my faction orders and thinking, I do spend a lot more time at the table now just wondering what's the best one to use. Should I use one? Should I save that? Can I use this one? Because they've all got several conditions on them now. They are a little bit more complex. I had just thought of this now, Mike, but you made the point that there used to be that one order that people would spam, and I actually think maybe there's a place to have still an order which is usable any number of times in a round, but it's just a very minor benefit that couldn't be used used with most of your units. Just as that sort of that hey, I've got something to spend command points on, during my turn.
Yeah, well, other than I like to take an additional activation, which of course everyone has access to. All right, I think by far and away one of the major changes has been to list building. Luke, did you want to run over your thoughts on this? I know we feel quite differently on this.
Well, so the list building rules now are that for each troop you can take one specialist or a command, and you have to take one command or troop. And then for every 2 troops you take, you can take 1 support unit. And there's some other stuff I'll jump into in a moment, but that changes from previously, which was that any troop would unlock a specialist or a command, and then any 2 of the troop specialist or command unlocks a support. The additional rules are that there's now the auxiliary keyword. So for those troops that probably should never have unlocked, like mules, they now no longer unlock. Again, pour one out for the engineer boys. The only reasonable cheap unlock in the list now doesn't unlock. And then also that there's limits on how many command specialists and support units you can take depending on the game size. So the reason why I think the unlocks could have been cleaned up a bit. The reason I'm not a huge fan of this comes again back to the elite armies. So enforcers have so many cool toys in the support slot that you just can't take now. You really struggle to unlock more than 1 support, and you
if you want to play 3 supports, it's basically impossible without completely hamstringing your list.
In an elite army.
In an elite army like Enforcers. So it really hurts them. And it hurts them additionally because all of their stuff got more expensive as well. So yes, they got better, but they got more expensive. So you can't unlock as many things and you can't play as many things. They become more elite. So you've basically got to pick the one support unit that you really want. And that's what you get to play with. And that's basically it. And that's a real shame because Enforcers have a ton of really cool support options.
Yeah, so I think that the tightness of support slots now is a real change for them. I mean, it's the case across armies, but you're right. I mean, but I think Enforcers do suffer the most from the tightness there. Have you found something similar in Forge Fathers?
Oh, definitely in Forge Fathers. I play the elite armies, I said Forge Fathers and Enforcers. The one thing I do find a little bit interesting is not less so in Enforcers, Forge Fathers, is the leader options now can have bigger units. So you could only take like 2 extra models to it. Now you can add at least 2 more, or even in some cases you can add a little bit more. So at least that choice between do you want to take a command option or do you want to take a support option is a little bit more balanced in some cases. So, but it can become quite a difficult choice, especially when, in my experience, or at least the way I like to play Forge Fathers, I'm looking for options with speed. So I'm looking at the support options in the bikes and the drop troops so I can get up the board quicker. I have at least a method to be able to do that, which then leads to a choice of, well, can I take another leader somewhere along the line, or what am I going to take? And I think that's when you sort of have all the heavy armor options are generally quite expensive, with the exception, I guess, of the Rekia and etc. going through. But then you just got to have it. But Enforcers definitely, and it will go into something else I'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about keywords. There's something else that limits the Enforcers on that. And I guess that's where they do sort of struggle on how you're going to build them, because I find Enforcers are a little bit more shoehorned than a few other factions.
Yeah, and it's not just Enforcers. Like Marauders, I have 6 gun tracks. They're competing with Hulks. They're competing with stunt bots. The new Hornet. Those are all fantastic options. There is no way I'm playing a gun track.
They're not competing with a Hornet, but they would be competing with the gun, the TAD 67.
They're competing for slots,
yeah,
right? Like, it doesn't matter if they're competing in roles; they're competing for slots. Mm-hmm. So, they're 6 gun tracks that were the worst experience of my life to assemble that I now won't be putting on the table. So,
yeah. I mean, I think, and we've chatted about this before. I think for some of those support options, which are quite cheap, as in about 60 points, it's really hard to justify bringing them as a one-off when that support slot is so valuable. I think looking forward, I'd be interested if they're able to make those a 1 to 2 sitting in the one slot, and whether you take them as a unit, I would see them starting to possibly be taken then. That support slot is so valuable. But I mean, I certainly... I said that we somewhat disagree in opinion. I really like the tightness of it. I love a good list building challenge. And I know before I could have done something ridiculous like take a mule and then put a Leaper Sentient and Retinue in there. And then between the two of them, that unlocks a corruption. And I don't actually have a regular troop unit really on the board yet.
That sounds awesome.
I understand that. It sounds awesome.
It's interesting. It's fun.
Yeah, but
flavorful.
For mine, there just has to be such a reason to take those troops, and it certainly was the point before. I think we also found ourselves a lot more flush with command dice pre-command protocols as well, because you weren't having to take those troops as unlocks so much because your command and your specialists unlocked as well. If I would never generally choose to take a Leaper unit, I'll take a Leaper Sentient unit and get some extra command dice out of it as well, and another bubble for command and all the other things that come from it. So it's I think we also found ourselves more flush with command. I think our numbers of commanders we're taking has also come down because we're having to focus more on getting those unlocking troops in, and they can't just be auxiliary vehicles either.
Yeah, I think because in the last edition, I used to take pretty much 3 at basically one for every 500 points, basically 3 and 1,500 points. Like we played 1,500 quite regularly. I know a lot of other places in the world played 1,000. But we played 1500 pretty much here. So I had 3, but these days I struggle to get 2. So when you were saying about unlocks before, like in the previous edition, I love, and I still love, Forge Guard. But the fact that I'm finding that I need to get speed into the list, the only way I'm getting Forge Guard now is by taking Forge Guard Huskars, which means that I can't take the auxiliary weapons. I can't put one with a missile launcher on or anything else. They've just got their normal guns. No, they're rock hard, don't get me wrong. But so they're a really good unit. But I find struggling to find a third method to put in, or I need to take that sacrifice now on speed to be able to take something that's going to be rock hard and plod to 5 inches up the board every single turn while it's trying to get to wherever. But once it's sitting on that objective, good luck trying to get rid of it. So it does make things a little bit interesting. I do go curse you gadget, like I can't get that extra support piece, or I have to decide on whether I'm going to take an extra command point or take that thing. But to go back to your point, like, no, I'm not taking a Jotun. I'm not taking a Inferno mining laser, because
it's too small for the slot.
It's too small for the slot. I'd rather take a thermal instead, or take a Stonehammer, whatever. So the other thing that's been introduced, obviously, in command protocols, there are a number of different keywords that's coming in, and I think we've all chose one that we think has the biggest impact in the game at the moment. So I'll lead off, and for me, it's a new rule which is called trademark. So all the factions have particular weapons that they use, which I always thought was cool, even from Dead Zone. So Forge Fathers tend to use more ballistic type weapons, and Enforcers and laser type weapons and so forth. And each one has a different type. And they've all that basic weapon type for those particular factions now has the keyword trademark next to it. And how that comes into play is we go back to where we were talking about the orders before, and each faction has 6 orders. And the majority of those particular orders will actually reference trademark weapons. So it allows that particular faction then to do some funky things with their particular weapons as they go through. And they're all pretty thematic along those sorts of lines for let them to be able to do that. But it means it restricts them on what they're going to be able to do. So some of the specialist units, or the really fun things that Luke was talking about before, you could take those, but most of your orders probably won't work with that particular unit. So it's another balancing another balancing way in the game to go through that, and I guess so almost force you to take the more basic troops in the game, so you're actually playing them there, because it encourages you to be able to take those particular units.
But not too basic, because recruits get nothing.
Well, yeah, that's certainly the case for a lot of the GCPS stuff. Yeah,
poor recruits.
Yeah. It certainly does make you rethink adding some special weapons into the units, because you are like, well, sure, this would be giving me an extra bit of utility here, but that's an extra model which is not going to be able to take advantage of an order.
100%. The number of times I go, oh no, I'm not going to put a grenade launcher in there because I intend for this to be one of my units that I can target with this order. So that's going to be, superfluous or whatever. So yeah, absolutely. Like, not taking special weapons because those orders exist is an actual thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it probably used to be the case for units where their job is to blaze away. I don't want to be putting a special in there, because most of the special weapons don't have blaze away, and they wouldn't be able to shoot at all. So there was a little bit of that before, but I think it's a lot stronger now with trademark. Absolutely.
Luke, what did you choose as your keyword of choice?
Well, I did choose something else, but then we got talking about mules again, so I changed to auxiliary. I think, So for the factions that can take mules, it's been, yes, it's a detriment to those factions, sure, because they can't do the crazy unlock stuff that they used to do, but it was all in balance and it was all really good. I think that was necessary, and it's really tempered those lists. Again, engineers, not a fan of them being auxiliary, particularly because now the only cheap way to unlock anything in Enforcers is to take 2 Peacekeepers. The elite of the elite to become your basic
cheap unlocks,
cheap unlocking unit, which is just wild to me. But so it's, I think we've just tempered down some of the list building
that could have gone a bit awry in the past, and it sort of brought everything into line a bit.
I mean, I think auxiliary also fills a really nice role in that we don't want this to be unlocking. We also don't want it to have to be unlocked.
Yeah.
We don't want this to be taking up what is now a valuable specialist slot. Now it can just be auxiliary and it's just unlock neutral.
Yeah, you can take 10 mules if you want. I mean, you probably don't want to, but you can if you've got them, you can play with them.
But it's not just mules. It's nearly. I'm pretty sure it's all transports. Like I know the Draco for the Forge Fathers is also auxiliary. I'm not. Is it,
Yeah, any troop transport, I think is.
They're all auxiliary now. So at least it's not unlocking. But I don't know how anyone can explain to me how the GCPS weapon teams are not auxiliary.
Yeah, they should probably be auxiliary. I agree.
Because you don't play them?
No, just like Mike said. I mean, look at Marauders. Their weapons teams are specialist, and it makes sense. For GCPS, like I kind of get why they're troops, but I think auxiliary would have been the good middle ground for them. They don't have to be unlocked. You can take as many as you want. It's just you can't take an army just of weapons teams and Wolverines.
Mm-hmm. Yes, precisely. Yes.
Which is something that you can do right now, which is,
Everybody thinks with GCPS is a whole bunch of bodies like on the table, but you can avoid that by just taking weapons teams. It just seems to...
And they're pretty good.
Go through... Yeah.
They don't score.
They do score objectives. But they don't score for unit strength. They have unit strength 0.
Sam, your choice of your keyword for this is...
I'm going to pick devastating, which I think is actually a bit of an innocuous one. One of the things I think in the Firefight second ed original was that some guns were not just better against, I think they were just better flat. In that if you wanted to be building a gun which is going to be taking out tanks, where you go, well, tanks have lots of wounds, we need to give it lots of shots. Tanks also have high armor, so we need to give it high AP. And then you've built that gun and it is great against tanks and it is murderous against infantry. And so it's having a rule like devastating where we can bring back the amount of shots up front, and so we can halve the number of shots because we're going to double it at the back end. Every one that actually lands explodes out onto a single model, I think is a great way of fixing that, because before there were just some weapons which are intended to go against tanks and they just hew through infantry, and you'd always pick those. There were very uninteresting choices to be made in weapon selections. You either go, I pay more points to get a better gun, or I don't. Whereas now there's a genuine, I'm picking this gun because it is better against. This gun is better against vehicles. This one is better against infantry. It has more shots at a lower AP, sometimes with pinning. And then you've also got missile launchers, which seem to sort of sit in the middle ground there. I think intended against... as anti-aircraft, but kind of just good all-rounders as well.
Well, they're explosive, right? So taking out troops kind of makes sense for missile launchers. I think one of the good things about the devastating change, besides that, is that it makes for some more interesting things when you look at the different ammo options for Wolverines, etc. So now there's like a viable reason to choose one ammo or another. It's not just the units you choose, but down to the turn-to-turn ammo choice. It's not just like, oh, well, this one explodes everything, so why would I ever choose the other ammo? I think the Enforcer Heavy Support is probably now a unit not to bother taking. You used to take them because they were anti-aircraft, anti-tank,
and anything in the game. They leave smoking bullets.
AT4, Blast D4. They were pretty wild. Now that they're devastating...
Don't forget your favourite order.
Yeah, and you would run them with Firestorm, right? Because of course you would, because everything needs to hit. And targeting systems, right? So like I'll kill that and I'll kill that in one go. So that was nasty. But there's not a whole lot of reason to take them now, because with them being less dice and devastating, they're not that all-round troop in a army that is very elite. So I think there's other options for that now.
I mean, I think they serve a place as a focused anti-tank option.
Yeah.
If you're like, I'm not taking any of my anti-tank vehicles, but I do want a squad which can reach out and touch an enemy tank from the other side of the board and give it something to really worry about.
Yeah, if you're playing Annihilation, you throw them in an interceptor, drop them on turn 1 and shoot something off the table.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's still a purpose in an anti-vehicle role, but now they're not anti the entire opposing army.
Anti whatever you bring.
And for mine, that's down to devastating and backloading damage.
Yeah, for sure.
Unless you're actually facing another Enforcer army, because then they can do a lot of devastating stuff.
Everything's got 2 wounds. That's another indirect nerf to Enforcers.
All right, so I think we've spoken a lot about a lot of the changes we really like. Are there any changes that we see that really should have been made but weren't?
I think in this one, the only thing really that springs to mind is the thing that I think springs to all our minds. And without question, it's flying transports.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. It's 100% agreed. They've got some great models out there, and for them, and at least as I said, the Enforcers at least have anti-grav, and they've got jetpacks. So not anti-grav, so they've got the jetpacks so they can get out of them and be able to use their vehicles properly. But then you got the Hornets, and then you got 3 factions that are supposed to use them, and with the exception of, I think, a new person playing them once in one game, I never see them on the table, and it is such a shame. And it's just because it takes too many orders to get your troops out of the vehicle. There's other more effective ways to be able to do that, and it's just such a shame to be able to see that. I don't know what else really to say. I don't know why they made those decisions on that and then kept it into command protocols.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think for the Enforcers, because there is anti-grav, there's certainly a role there. I mean, they really don't mind jumping out of their Accusator or Arbiter, and it's a way of getting up the table with some speed. Fair enough. But for the Hornet, I mean, most of those factions don't have anti-grav, and the units that do have anti-grav have Scout, and so they're getting up there on their own.
Or bulky. Murder birds.
Yeah.
Aren't they? Yeah.
Yes, they have anti-grav, but are bulky. And it's, I think particularly for my Plague, it's so disappointing because I've got one. I'd love to run it, but my units would be slower flying in and then dropping than just running. My troops can outrun a Plague Hornet.
Can Teratons teleport out of a Hornet?
Teratons are also bulky.
Yeah, of course they are.
Yeah, I mean, it's for mine. The thing that really kills it is the long action to disembark. And if it were an advance out and you can't assault, I think that's because then you can jump out of the Hornet and then shoot. Even if it's an advance action to be placed in base contact with the Hornet and you still have an action, I think that it's the entire long action to debark is after only having been able to make a 12-inch move, because you can't go faster than that. It's just too slow. If it had a role as a fast advance thing, but it's actually slower than just legging it across the board to fly.
Or jumping in a mule.
Yeah.
Well, so Sam, you actually had this was your idea, I believe, about how to fix flying transports that I think we might have proposed in the feedback form, but maybe it wasn't picked up. Do you want to run us through what that was? Because it's genius.
Oh, I mean, I think there's a couple. I mean, I think count Hornets that they can choose to flip between being flyers or anti-grav. They would then lose the -1 for being shot at. They're no longer flyers, but they count as an anti-grav vehicle. People are able to get out of them a bit more readily. I mean, considering there's really only 2 flying transports in the game, the Accuser variants and the Hornet variants, I mean, maybe it's just worth having a look at flying transports themselves, just in the base rules. That's probably been my only major disappointment for command protocols. I'd hoped that was going to be fixed, and I still don't have a reason to run a Hornet yet.
Yeah, and the Asterian one is anti-grav in the first place. It doesn't fly, so...
There is nothing that flies in the Asterian list.
There you go.
Which is, considering all the tech was designed for fighting Plague, why would you want to stay out of arm's reach?
No, it's because fly is terrible, and anti-grav is excellent. That's why.
All right, we're on to our section of the podcast. We're leaving behind command protocols now, and we're on to Overwatch. What are we most excited about that's coming down the pipe from Mantic? What's in our sights that's getting us excited?
Well, for me, I'd say Night Stalkers are really exciting. Mike and I were lucky enough to be in the beta testing group for that, so we've had some games and we see what's coming, and I assure you it's going to be fantastic and exciting. I'm really, really looking forward to it. They've done a fantastic job of keeping that Night Stalker aesthetic and feel of the army and how they play and translating that into Firefight. I think it's going to be awesome. And along with that, I'm excited to see what else is coming along in the summer of sci-fi.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I also with the Night Stalkers as well. It's really exciting. But for me, it's also because I can use them in two different systems. I want to have a new Kings of War army. I've pretty much finished my Varangar and I've been playing them for quite a number of years, and I want something new. And I didn't really want to paint armor. I wanted to paint something more organic for something. So I was already looking at Night Stalkers anyway. And the fact that they're coming out into Firefight as well, which is, and they're definitely going to play differently to the two armies, Forge Fighters and Enforcers that I play already. And as I said, I had plans to basically have the circle of bases that will still lock into the Kings of War type bases so I can use them in both forms. So I'm just waiting for the strike forces to be announced and decide upon what I'm going to be able to purchase on those. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
Very exciting. For myself, it's probably a little bit more mercenary. It's when Mantic spoiled that there's new Asterian hard plastics coming. Looking forward to seeing what's going to be happening with the Matsudan. The initial sketches they've been putting out for those, they look pretty sweet. I've started running Matsudan a little bit more in my Asterian forces at the moment. They're pretty chonky, which is great. So looking forward to seeing what's coming down the pipe there. All right, and that brings us to the end of our first episode of Controlled Fire. Thank you very much, gentlemen. So until next time, polish those trademark weapons, use those support slots wisely, and unleash Controlled Fire.
Hear the tales, fierce and deep, victors roar defeat.